Mom, we need to talk about your spending. Courtney was standing at the kitchen table when I walked in, tablet in hand. The look on her face, the one she gets when she's about to explain something to someone she considers a flight risk. I set the grocery bags down. I just got back from Kroger, Courtney. I know, I saw the notification. I straightened up. What notification? Mom, I installed an app on your card 2 weeks ago. Family Budget Pro. I told you about it. You didn't tell me. I did. You probably just didn't. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, Courtney, my card was declined at Kroger, at Register 3, in front of Jenny Coleman, who I have known for 7 years, and in front of a woman with a stroller who I have never met, but who now knows that Dorothy Hargrove's card got flagged for an apple pie. Courtney set the tablet down, tilted her head. Mom, the app flagged it as a luxury category item. The algorithm is still learning your luxury. It's not a big apple pie is not a luxury item. Mom, it's flour, butter, sugar, and apples. I have been making it in this kitchen for 41 years. Your father ate it every Sunday until the day he died. I made it for your 3rd grade class when Mrs. Patterson asked for volunteers, and you were the only kid whose mother actually showed up. So I need you to look me in the eye and tell me that Family Budget Pro has reviewed those facts and still considers it a luxury item. Silence. Courtney picked up the tablet again, scrolled something. Mom, I'm looking at your October statement right now. Lottery tickets, $42. Magazines, $28. Bakery and baked goods. Courtney. What? How much are you paying me in rent? A longer silence this time. We haven't really talked about how much are you paying me in rent? She didn't answer. Brad appeared in the doorway. He'd been standing there for at least 30 seconds. I could tell by the way he was holding his coffee mug, like a man who'd decided not to move until someone told him it was safe. He looked at Courtney, looked at me, looked at his coffee. Jesus. My name is Dorothy Hargrove, 71 years old. For 32 years, I was a senior auditor at the IRS, Corporate Compliance Division. My job was finding people who thought they were smarter than the paperwork. In 32 years, not one of them was. 3 months ago, my daughter Courtney moved into my house after her divorce. Temporarily, she said. Brad came too, something about ironing out the property settlement, easier to be nearby. That was 3 months ago. The property settlement apparently requires a lot of ironing. Temporarily was long enough to install a spending app on my credit card, set my apple pie to luxury, and stand in my kitchen explaining my October statement to me like I was a deposition witness who'd wandered in off the street. I looked at her, then at Brad, then at the grocery bags on the counter, the apple pie sitting right on top, $14.99, paid cash, with a 20 I found in my coat pocket from last winter. I picked up a pen from the counter, opened the notepad I keep by the phone, wrote at the top of the page, Invoice number 001. Client, Courtney Ann Hargrove Voss. Services rendered, childhood, full service. Period, 1980 to 2001. If we're counting pennies, sweetheart, let's count them professionally. I'm declaring an audit, full scope, all billable parental services, 1980 through 2001. Courtney stared at me. Mom, you're not serious. I looked up from the notepad. Standard rate is $400 an hour.
That's senior partner billing at your firm, if I'm not mistaken. The first invoice will be ready by dinner. I put the pen down, picked up the apple pie, walked to the oven.
Oven was on, the pie was in. The kitchen oven was on, the pie was in. The kitchen smelled the way it had smelled every Sunday for 41 years. Cinnamon, brown sugar, Granny Smith's from the Kroger produce section, because John always said the ones from the farmer's market were too tart, and I'd never bothered to form a different opinion after he was gone. I had the notepad in front of me, the pen. Invoice number 001. I looked at it. Then I looked at the Family Budget Pro notification, still sitting on my phone screen. Purchase blocked. Apple pie, $14.99. Category, luxury items. Approval required. C. Hargrove Voss. I thought about Jenny Coleman. She'd been working Register 3 at that Kroger since her kids were in middle school. She knows I buy Granny Smith's. She knows I don't use coupons because John always forgot to clip them and I never broke the habit. She'd looked at my card screen and then at me with an expression I recognized. The expression people use when they're pretending they didn't see something. I thought about the woman with the stroller. Late 30s, probably. Reusable grocery bags. Kid with a graham cracker. She'd been close enough to read the notification on the terminal. I know because I'd watched her eyes move. I picked up the pen. Then I put it down and opened my laptop instead. I have a system for audits. 32 years of the same system, and it works because it doesn't start with conclusions. It starts with facts. You build the timeline first. You go back further than the problem because the problem is never where it looks like it starts. I opened a new spreadsheet, named the file Hargrove Voss Consulting Services, Billable Hours, 1980 to 2024. Then I sat back and thought about the last 3 months. Courtney had arrived on a Tuesday in September with 4 suitcases, a box of work files, and Brad. The suitcases I'd expected. The files I'd expected. Brad I had not expected. But Courtney had explained it quickly and efficiently, the way she explains everything, that since the divorce proceedings involved shared property and shared accounts and shared everything else, it made more logistical sense for both of them to be in one place while the lawyers sorted things out. I had said, how long? Courtney had said, not long. I thought about that now. Not long. In 32 years of federal audits, not long was what people said when they didn't want to tell you the actual number. I started typing. The spending app had appeared on week 3. Courtney had mentioned it over breakfast. I was reading the paper, she was on her laptop, and she'd said something like, "Oh, I set up a shared account tracker for the household, just so we can all see where the money's going. I'll send you the link." I had said, because I was reading about the Cavaliers, and I thought she meant some kind of Venmo situation. I had not thought she meant a financial oversight application linked directly to my credit card with veto authority. Week 5. Courtney had reorganized the pantry. She hadn't asked. I'd come downstairs one morning and the canned goods were alphabetized and my mother's cast iron skillet was on a different hook because it made more ergonomic sense. I'd moved it back. The next day, it was on the new hook again. I moved it back. We did this 4 times before I decided the skillet wasn't worth the conversation and left it where Courtney put it. I noted this in the spreadsheet. Column header, unauthorized restructuring of trust assets. Week 6. Brad had moved my recliner 3 inches to the left because it was blocking the sightline to the TV. He'd asked first, which I appreciated, and I'd said fine, which I meant, and then I'd noticed 2 days later that the recliner was also now facing the TV at a slightly different angle, which meant he'd rotated it as well, which he had not mentioned. Column: Modification of sovereign territory without full disclosure. Week 7. Courtney had called her friend Diane from the living room at 9:30 on a Wednesday night, and I'd heard her say, not quietly, because Courtney is not a quiet person on the phone, "She's fine. She just needs some structure. You know how it is with older people. They get set in their routines, and then the routines stop making sense, but they can't see it from the inside. We're just helping her optimize." I sat very still when I heard that. I had audited a pharmaceutical company in 2003 that used the word optimize 47 times in a single quarterly report. They owed the federal government $4.2 million. Column: Undisclosed characterization of client as impaired. Week 9. Last week. Courtney had suggested over dinner that maybe it would make sense to consolidate the household accounts, just to simplify things. She'd had a whole presentation ready, I realized afterward. She'd waited until Brad had poured the wine and I was eating, when people are at their most agreeable, and she'd pulled up a document on her tablet and walked me through it like a client meeting. Joint account, transparent spending, everyone on the same page. I had said I'd think about it. 2 days later, Family Budget Pro appeared on my card without further discussion. I looked at my spreadsheet. I looked at the oven. The timer had 4 minutes left. I added one more column at the end: projected settlement value with compound interest, CPI adjustment, prime rate. Then I started running the numbers. By the time the pie was done, I had a preliminary figure. I wrote it at the bottom of the notepad page under invoice number 001. $1,247,893.14. I looked at it for a moment. Then I took the pie out of the oven, set it on the rack. The kitchen smelled like every Sunday John was alive. I thought, $14.99. I thought, luxury items. I thought, approval required. C. Hargrove Voss. I picked up the pen, added a line at the bottom of the invoice. Payment terms, net 30 days. Late fees apply at standard IRS rate. There's a thing that happens in audits when you've found what you're looking for, a kind of stillness, not excitement. Excitement makes you sloppy. Just a very clear, very quiet sense of where things stand. I felt that now. I closed the laptop, put the notepad in the kitchen drawer next to the phone, washed my hands, cut 2 pieces of pie and put them on plates. Then I walked into the living room where Courtney was on her laptop and Brad was watching baseball, and I set a plate in front of each of them. Courtney looked up. "Mom, apple pie, $14.99. I'll add it to the invoice." I went back to the kitchen and ate my piece standing at the counter, looking out the window at the yard. 41 years in this house. John had planted the oak tree in the back the year Courtney was born. It was 60 feet tall now. I thought, she doesn't know about the oak tree. She doesn't know what year it was planted, or why, or what John said when the nursery guy told him it would take 20 years to get real shade from it. She just knows it's there. She's been here 3 months, and she thinks she knows what the house needs. I rinsed my plate, dried it, put it away. Tomorrow was Tuesday. The girls were coming over. Ruth, Marge, Phyllis, poker night. I had a lot to show them. Ruth Kowalski had been a detective with the Akron PD for 26 years, and she had never in her life entered a room quietly. She came through my front door at 6:45 with a bottle of Merlot, a bag of pretzels, and an opinion already forming. "So where are they? Are they home?" "They're at dinner. Brad had a work thing." Damn, I wanted to see the situation in the wild. Marge Delacroix came in behind her, folding her umbrella with the precision of a woman who has folded a great many documents in her time. Marge had been a CPA for 38 years, and she processed information the way I did, quietly, completely, and with an eye for what the numbers were actually saying. Phyllis Okafor came last, carrying a ceramic dish covered in foil. "I brought my sweet potato casserole, Dot. I figured you needed something comforting." Ruth looked at the dish. "Phyllis, is there a story about that casserole?" "There's no story. It's just a casserole." "Last time you brought a casserole somewhere, there was definitely a story." That was a completely different situation, and the restraining order was later dropped. We sat down at the kitchen table, the real table, the one John and I bought at an estate sale in 1987, and which has survived 4 Thanksgiving arguments, 2 leaky roofs, and Courtney's brief adolescent phase when she tried to strip and refinish it herself. Ruth poured the wine. I got out the cards and the chips. And then I put the printed spreadsheet on the table. Ruth picked it up, read for a moment. "Dot. Preliminary. I haven't added compound interest yet." Marge took it from her, put on her reading glasses, the ones on the chain. She read the way she always reads, completely still, no expression, moving only her eyes. Ruth watched her. "Marge? Marge, for the love of—" "Ruth, I'm reading." Phyllis leaned over to look at the spreadsheet. Then she looked at me. "Dot, honey, is this an invoice? For raising Courtney?" "Yes." "How much?" $1.2 million, roughly, before interest. Phyllis sat back in her chair. Marge set the spreadsheet down, took off her reading glasses, looked at me over the table. "Dot, these numbers are—" "I know. The compound interest calculation alone is—" "I know. You used prime rate?" "Prime rate plus 1.5, which is what the IRS charges on underpayments." A silence. Then Marge said, "Shit." Ruth pointed at her. "See, that's how you know it's serious." Marge swore. "She blocked the apple pie, Ruth." "I know she blocked the apple pie. I'm just saying that when Marge swears, it means the numbers are correct, which they are." Phyllis had picked up the spreadsheet now and was reading it with the expression of someone encountering a car accident, unable to look away, slightly pale. "Dot, there's a line item here for 3rd grade class snacks?" "Mrs. Patterson asked for a volunteer. I showed up. 4 dozen snickerdoodles. I've adjusted for inflation." "Labor and delivery, adjusted for medical cost inflation since 1980. The hospital records are in my files if she wants to audit them back." "You have the hospital records?" "I have everything, Phyllis. I worked for the IRS." Ruth poured herself more wine. "Okay, walk me through the plan. Because I see the invoice. I don't yet see how the invoice becomes the thing that actually—" "It's not the invoice, Ruth. The invoice is step 1. "What's step 2? I shuffled the cards, dealt. "The invoice establishes the framework. It says, we are counting, we are documenting, we are treating this household as a financial arrangement, since that appears to be how my daughter prefers to think about it." And then we see what she does. Marge picked up her cards, arranged them. "She'll call it legally frivolous." "She will." And then I send the demand letter. Marge looked at me over her cards. "Dot, do you want me to notarize the demand letter?" "Marge, I was hoping you'd offer." Ruth slapped the table. "Oh, for Christ's sake, this is the best Tuesday we've had in years." "Girls, shouldn't we she is her daughter.
Maybe if Dot just sat her down and, Phyllis, I'm just saying, a conversation. She blocked the pie, Phyllis. The pie. There is no conversation. We are past conversation. We are in the documentation phase. Keep up. Dot, sweetheart, is there any part of you that just wants to talk to her? I looked at Phyllis. She's the kindest person I know. She's also never done an audit. I've been talking to her for 44 years, Phyllis. She installed the app anyway. Phyllis considered this. Okay, notarize the letter. Thank you, said Marge. We played for 2 hours. Ruth won $40, which she always does. Marge won $20, which she always does. Phyllis lost $30 and gave everyone her sweet potato casserole as recompense, which is also traditional. I was dealt 3 of a kind twice and folded both times because I was running numbers in my head instead of watching the table. When they were putting on their coats to leave, Ruth stopped in my doorway. Dot, you doing okay? Actually? I thought about it. I paid cash for a $14 pie, Ruth, in front of Jenny Coleman, with a $20 from my coat pocket. Ruth looked at me for a moment. Yeah, okay. Yeah. She squeezed my arm, went to her car. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away. The street was quiet. Courtney and Brad's cars were still gone. I went inside, locked up, went to bed. In the morning, I would send invoice number 001. Courtney received it at 6:47 a.m. I know because I was up, and I heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter, and I heard the specific silence that follows when someone opens an email they were not expecting. Then I heard her footsteps. She appeared in the kitchen doorway. I was making coffee. Mom, what is this? Invoice number 001.
Full service childhood, 1980 through 2001. Plus supplemental services rendered through present day. Itemized schedule is attached. You invoiced me for being born. The line item is labor and delivery, adjusted for medical cost inflation. It's standard practice. Would you like me to walk you through the methodology? Mom, this is not legally enforceable. Of course not. It's a civil matter, like, for instance, a spending application installed on someone's credit card without their informed consent. Courtney stared at me. I told you about the app. You mentioned it while I was reading the sports section. That's not the same thing as informed consent. We covered this at the IRS. Mom, I'm a lawyer. I know, sweetheart. I invoiced you for law school, too. Tuition, room and board, bar exam prep materials, the navy blazer you needed for your first interview, adjusted for inflation and interest. It's on page 4. She looked at the email, scrolled, stopped. There's a line item for teaching you to ride a bike. 4 sessions, 2 hours each. I've billed it at the standard tutoring rate for the period. 3 skinned knees treated, medical supplies, and parental labor. The Band-Aids have increased significantly with CPI. You'd be surprised. Courtney set her phone face down on the counter, took a breath, the kind of breath she takes before a closing argument. Mom, I want you to understand that I did this, the app, the budget, because I'm worried about you. You're 71 years old. You're living alone. I'm not living alone. You're here. You know what I mean. Dad's been gone 8 years. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. Yes. I poured my coffee, turned around. Courtney, I audited Fortune 500 companies for 32 years. I identified $2.4 million in unreported income in a case that the Chicago field office had already closed. I completed my taxes on paper until 2014 because I didn't trust the software. I have a fully funded pension, a paid-off mortgage, a brokerage account your father and I opened in 1989 and which I have managed myself since he died. And last Saturday, I drove to Kroger, selected my groceries, proceeded to register 3, and was informed by an algorithm that I required your approval to purchase a pie. Silence. That's what the invoice is, Courtney. It's a response, in the language you selected. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, what are you actually asking for here, Mom? What do you want? I looked at her. 3 things. First, the app comes off my card by end of business today. Second, we discuss any future household arrangements as adults in advance with my actual agreement. Third, I picked up my coffee. Apple pie is removed from the luxury category retroactively with a written acknowledgement that it never belonged there. Courtney looked at me, looked at her phone, looked at me again. And if I don't agree to those terms? I set down my mug. Then I send the demand letter. What demand letter? The one Marge is notarizing this afternoon. A very long silence. You had Marge notarize a demand letter? Not yet. She's doing it this afternoon. She brings her seal to poker. She's been bringing it for 12 years. We've never needed it before. Courtney stared at me. Brad appeared in the doorway again. Same mug, same position, like he'd never left. He looked at Courtney, looked at me, looked at his coffee. Is there pie? There's pie, Brad. He moved very carefully to the counter, cut himself a slice, and left the room again. Courtney watched him go. He's completely useless. He paid the entry fee. What entry fee? We'll get to that. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. The oven was preheating, the pie was on the counter. Outside, a squirrel was doing something aggressive to my bird feeder, which is a problem I've been managing for 6 years and still haven't solved. I opened the notepad to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote a second heading, Timeline of Events. Hargrove Domestic Operations, Q3/Q4. I am not a sentimental person. I do not keep journals. I do not process things by talking about them. And I have never once written in a gratitude notebook, which Courtney gave me for my birthday 2 years ago, along with a card that said, "Sometimes slowing down is the bravest thing we can do." I used it to track my garden expenses. The point is, I think in columns. I always have. So I made a column. August 14th. Courtney calls. She and Brad are separating. She sounds controlled, which means she's been rehearsing the call for at least a day. She asks if she can stay with me for a little while. I say yes. Of course I say yes. She's my daughter. August 19th. They arrive, both of them. Courtney explains that Brad will sleep in the guest room and they will finalize the property agreement within 30 days, 60 at the most, and then everyone will go back to their lives. She says this with the confidence of a woman who has never tried to split a brokerage account with someone she's also still arguing about dishes with at 11 o'clock at night in a house that isn't theirs. August 23rd. Brad moves my recliner to make room for his monitor setup. He asks first, which I appreciate. I tell him to put it back when he's done. He says sure. The recliner is still in the corner by the window, which is not where it goes. September 3rd. Courtney reorganizes the spice cabinet. She puts it in alphabetical order. I ask her why. She says it's more efficient. I point out that I have been cooking in this kitchen for 41 years and have never once needed to find anise in under 10 seconds. She says she'll put it back if I want. She does not put it back. September 11th. Courtney mentions over dinner that she's noticed my grocery receipts seem high and wonders if I'd be open to a household budget conversation. I say sure. I think she means we'll talk about splitting the groceries 3 ways. This is not what she means. September 16th, the Family Budget Pro conversation. She walks me through it on her tablet. It's a shared account management tool, she says. It helps keep everyone on the same page. I ask what page that is. She says the financially responsible one. I nod. I do not read the terms of service at the dinner table. This is the only mistake I make in this entire story. September 29th. I try to buy a lottery ticket at the BP station on Maple. $1. The card is declined. The man behind me buys a 6-pack and a scratch-off and does not make eye contact with me on his way out. I pay cash. October 2nd. I try to renew my subscription to Fine Gardening magazine. $28 a year. Declined. Category: print media, non-essential. I call the number on the back of the card. A recorded voice tells me that my account administrator has set restrictions on certain purchase categories. I hold the phone for a moment. Then I hang up and renew the magazine with my emergency visa, which I have kept in the lining of my winter coat since 1987 for reasons exactly like this. October 14th. Kroger, Register 3, Jenny Coleman. Apple pie, $14.99. I looked at the list. 32 years of auditing teaches you one thing above everything else. People don't start with the big violation. They start small. They test a boundary, and when nobody pushes back, they take one more step, then another. By the time you're looking at the actual paperwork, the pattern has been there for months, and everyone involved has found a way to pretend it's normal. The app wasn't a system, it was a test. I'd failed it by not saying anything in September. I wouldn't make that mistake twice. I tore the timeline page out of the notepad, folded it in thirds, and put it in the folder I keep in the second drawer, the one where I used to keep the kids' report cards, and then the mortgage documents, and then John's medical files, and now, apparently, this. Then I opened my laptop, which Courtney had once described as a legacy device, and offered to replace with something more intuitive, and I opened Excel. I have been using Excel since before Excel had a name. The file I created was called HV_consulting services _billable_ 1980 to 2024.xlsx. I started with the early years, conservative estimates. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was trying to be accurate. The oven beeped. I got up to put the pie in, came back, and kept working. By the time the pie was done, I had a preliminary figure. I wrote it at the bottom of the first page of the notepad, circled it twice, and sat back in my chair. $1,247,893.14. That was before compound interest. I cut myself a slice of pie. It was good. It was, in my professional assessment, worth significantly more than $14.99. Brad knocked on the kitchen door frame at 7:30 that evening. He does this, knocks on open doorways. He's been doing it since the first week, which told me something about the kind of house he grew up in and the kind of marriage he'd been in, though I kept that observation to myself. "Hey, Dot," You doing okay? Fine. There's pie on the counter. He looked at the pie, looked at me. Courtney's on a call. Work thing. He came in, cut himself a piece, sat down at the table without being invited, which I did not mind. Brad is one of those people who improves slightly when Courtney isn't in the room. Not enormously, but measurably. For what it's worth, the pie thing. I didn't know she'd set the threshold that low. Did you know about the app? A pause. I knew she was setting something up. She said it was to help manage the household. I thought, Brad, yeah, did you know about the app? He ate a bite of pie, put his fork down. Yeah, I knew. Okay. I didn't think it would. It's fine, Brad. I'm not angry at you. He looked like he wasn't sure whether that was better or worse than if I were angry at him. What are you going to do? I closed my laptop. I'm going to finish my pie. Then I'm going to send an email. The invoice thing. You're actually doing it. I have a preliminary figure. He was quiet for a moment. Jesus. Compound interest isn't finalized yet. Brad looked at the ceiling, then back at his pie. He took another bite. For what it's worth, Dot, the pie is genuinely not a luxury item. I know. I'm going to pay for the piece I just had, whatever the rate is. I looked at him. Standard rate for kitchen access is $20. Coffee and baked goods are included. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and put a 20 on the table without any expression on his face whatsoever. I took it. He finished his pie and left. I opened my laptop again and wrote one more line at the bottom of my notes. Brad Voss, kitchen access fee paid in full. Possible asset. Do not invoice further at this time. The Tuesday night irregulars have been meeting for 11 years. It started as a garden club. 4 women from the neighborhood who all happen to have opinions about soil pH and no patience for the kind of garden club where you have to bring a casserole and pretend to enjoy a PowerPoint about mulching techniques. We met in Marge's backyard in the spring, traded cuttings, argued about hostas, and somewhere around the 3rd meeting, Ruth produced a deck of cards and a bottle of bourbon and said that poker was more honest than gardening anyway, because at least with poker, you knew someone was going to lose. We've been doing both ever since. Thursday afternoons in season, garden work. Tuesday evenings year-round, poker. The 4 of us, me, Ruth Kowalski, Marge Delacroix, and Phyllis Okafor. We have collectively outlasted 6 marriages, 4 sets of neighbors, 1 HOA board president who tried to regulate our garden club as a commercial enterprise, and a brief but intense period in 2019 when Ruth and Marge didn't speak for 6 weeks over a disputed hand that I still believe Ruth won fair and square. I have never said this to Marge. The Thursday after the Kroger incident, we were in Marge's garden doing the autumn rose pruning. It was cold enough for gloves, but not cold enough to complain about. Ruth was cutting back her climbing rose with the kind of focus she used to give to criminal interrogations, which is to say, total and slightly alarming. Phyllis was deadheading the last of the dahlias. Marge was annotating a plant catalog with a red pen, which is something she does instead of actually buying things from it, a system I respect. I told them about the app. Ruth stopped cutting. She put a what on your card? A spending management app. It flags purchases by category. Apple pie is apparently a luxury item. For Christ's sake, Dot! Ruth, keep your voice down. I have neighbors. You're all neighbors. That's the whole point of a neighborhood. She blocked your pie? The algorithm flagged it. Courtney says it's still learning my patterns. Oh, good. At least the algorithm is getting an education. Phyllis, are you hearing this? Phyllis looked up from the dahlias. I'm sure she means well, honey. Divorce is hard. She's probably just... She put a spending cap on her mother's card, Phyllis. I heard you the first time, Ruth. I'm not deaf. Then why are you defending her? I'm not defending her. I'm trying to understand her. Understanding her isn't going to get Dot's pie back. Marge had not looked up from her catalog. She turned a page. Dot, does she have a notarized power of attorney for your finances? No. Financial guardianship order from the court? No. Any legal instrument whatsoever giving her authority over your accounts? No. Marge turned another page. Then she has nothing. Legally speaking, she installed software on your account without authorization and is exercising control she has no right to exercise. Ha! Marge, I love you! I'm not saying it because it's satisfying. I'm said of my coat pocket. I'd brought the folded page out of my coat pocket. I'd brought the preliminary summary, not the full spreadsheet, and smoothed it out on the potting bench. They looked at it. Ruth picked it up, read it, put it down. Dot. It's preliminary. I haven't added compound interest. Holy Marge, look at this. Marge put down the catalog, picked up the page, read it without any change in expression, which is how I knew she was impressed. The methodology is sound. I based the hourly rate on senior partner billing at Courtney's firm. Obviously. Is this legal? Phyllis had come over to look. It's a civil claim. Anyone can file a civil claim for services rendered. But she's your daughter. Yes. And she installed a spending app on my credit card and told me apple pie is a luxury. Phyllis, I love you, but right now is not the moment for moral complexity. Phyllis looked at the number at the bottom of the page, at the circle around it. She opened her mouth, closed it. Sweet Lord in heaven. Ruth handed the page back to me. What do you need from us? I need someone with a notary stamp. Marge raised her hand without looking up. She'd gone back to the catalog. I need a witness signature on a demand letter. Ruth raised both hands. And I need Phyllis to not talk me out of it between now and Tuesday. I don't always... Ruth and I looked at her. Fine, I'll try. That was Thursday. By Tuesday, the demand letter was drafted. Poker night at my house. The four of us around the kitchen table, which is where we always play because Marge's table wobbles. Ruth's cat is a cheat. It sits on the table and stares at your hand. And Phyllis lives 20 minutes out and doesn't like to host in winter because her driveway ices up. Brad had taken Courtney to dinner. Some attempt at a civil evening, working through the property division. I did not ask which restaurant. I put the good tablecloth on and opened a bottle of Riesling. Marge arrived with her notary stamp in her purse. You brought it, I said. You said to bring it. I know, I just appreciate the commitment. I've been notarizing things for 40 years. I once notarized a document in a parking garage during a hailstorm because the deadline was at noon and the courthouse was locked. This is not an unusual effort for me. Ruth came in behind her carrying a bottle of bourbon and a bag of chips. Is the document ready? Do we sign it tonight? We play poker first. Can we do both? We can do poker first and then both. Phyllis arrived last with a plate of lemon bars and the expression of someone who has decided to be supportive even though she still has reservations, which is the best Phyllis ever does, and which is, honestly, enough. We played 3 hands before I put the demand letter on the table. It was 2 pages. typed on my Remington, the electric one, not the manual, though I considered the manual for the visual effect. Standard civil demand format, which I know because I spent 32 years receiving them from tax attorneys, and enough of that exposure sticks. The amount, the basis for the claim, the timeline, the request for response within 30 business days. At the bottom, a line for a notary stamp and a line for a witness. Ruth read the whole thing without speaking, which is not something Ruth does often. This is the most beautiful piece of paper I have seen since my retirement commendation, and that had a gold seal. This has Marge's stamp. Even better. Marge read it next. She made one correction, a comma, and initialed the margin. Then she uncapped her stamp. Do you want me to? Please. The stamp came down. That sound, that solid, authoritative thunk of a notary seal, is one of the most satisfying sounds in the world. I have thought this since the first time I heard it in 1987, and I think it now. Marge handed the pen to Ruth, who signed the witness line with a flourish that was completely unnecessary and absolutely correct. Phyllis was looking at the lemon bars. Phyllis, you okay? I'm thinking about Courtney. What about her? She moved in after her divorce. She's clearly not doing well. And now her mother is sending her a notarized invoice for $1 million. $1,247,000. I know the number, and 14 cents. I know. I'm just saying, is there a version of this where you talk to her first, before the letter? I picked up my cards, looked at them, set them back down. Phyllis, I have been talking to her since August. Every time she moved something in this house, every time the card didn't work. I talked to her the day of the Kroger thing, right in that kitchen, and she told me the algorithm was still learning my patterns. I know. She put apple pie on a budget app and told me it was a luxury item in my house that I have lived in for 41 years, that her father and I paid off in 2009. Phyllis was quiet. I know. I'm not trying to hurt her. I'm trying to get her attention. A notarized $1 million invoice is quite a lot of attention. She's a lawyer. She responds to documents. Ruth pointed at me. That's the smartest thing anyone has said in this kitchen all week, and I'm including everything Brad has said, which I realize is a low bar. He paid his kitchen access fee. He what? $20 in cash, without being asked twice. Ruth looked at Marge. Marge looked at Ruth. Are you charging your house guests to use your kitchen? I'm charging unauthorized occupants of the Hargrove Domestic Trust to access trust facilities. A silence. Say that again. The Hargrove Domestic Trust, number 1. I declared it last week. Kitchen, master bedroom, and garage. Any use of trust facilities by non-trust members is subject to standard access fees. Ruth sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at me. I want to pay the $20 just to be part of this. You're a guest of the trust, Ruth. Guests are exempt. That's very generous, but I want to contribute to the cause. Then win at poker and put it in the kitty. She won the next 3 hands. I'm still not sure if that was strategy or if Ruth is genuinely the luckiest person I have ever known, which, given her 30 years in law enforcement, is saying something. We mailed the demand letter the next morning, certified, return receipt requested. I watched Marge hand it to the postal clerk and felt something settle in my chest. That particular satisfaction of a document that is correct, properly formatted, and entirely legal being released into the world to do its job. You know she's going to call immediately. Probably. And she's going to be very upset. Probably. And she's going to say, I've lost my mind. She put apple pie on a luxury budget. She lost the moral high ground some time ago. We drove back in Marge's car. The radio was on. Outside, Akron was doing its November thing. Gray sky, bare trees, that particular light that means winter is not a threat anymore, but a fact. I felt fine. I felt, if I'm being accurate about it, quite good. The demand letter arrived on a Thursday. I know because Courtney called me at 8:47 in the morning, which is when the mail runs on her block. And I know her mail runs because I have been sending birthday cards to that address for the 11 years she lived there before Brad. I was in the garden. It was cold. I was covering the rose bed with burlap, a job that needs doing before the first hard freeze, and that I have been doing solo since John died, which I mention not for sympathy, but because it is relevant to the amount of bending involved and to the fact that when my phone rang, I had dirt on both gloves and was not in a mood for a difficult conversation. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. I listened to it in the car with the heat on. Courtney had used the phrase legally frivolous 3 times. This is not how families work twice. And, Mom, I genuinely think you need to talk to someone once. Which is a sentence that means different things depending on who says it and why. And in this context meant that she was rattled and reaching for language that would make me feel like the problem. I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. Mom, what is this? It's a demand letter. Did you read the full document or just the amount? I read the, Mom, you can't invoice me for my childhood. The billing begins at age 2. I gave you a discount on the first 24 months, which frankly I think is generous given the sleep disruption alone. This is not funny. I'm not laughing. You're asking me for over $1 million for making me sandwiches and driving me to soccer. Lacrosse. What? You played lacrosse, not soccer. You played soccer for 1 season in 3rd grade. You said the shin guards were uncomfortable and you quit. You played lacrosse for 7 years. I drove you to practice every Tuesday and Thursday, plus weekend games, for 7 years. That's in the appendix. A silence. There's an appendix? Itemized. Mileage is calculated at the standard IRS reimbursement rate for the relevant year. It increases over time. Mom. Courtney. Is this about the app? It's about running a professional audit of the household finances, which is what you said we needed. I'm simply applying the same standard to both directions. That's not... The response period is 30 business days. I'm happy to discuss a payment plan if the full amount is a hardship. Given that you are currently living in my house rent-free, I would think cash flow is manageable, but I understand everyone's situation is different. Another silence. Longer this time. You sent me a notarized invoice for $1 million because I put a budgeting app on your credit card? $1,247,893.14. The 14 cents is mileage rounding. I can show you the formula. I could hear her breathing. Mom, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about it before you answer. I generally think before I answer things, Courtney. That's been true for 71 years. Are you doing okay? I mean, genuinely. Since Dad, I'm fine. I'm in my garden. I'm covering the roses for winter. I made a pie yesterday that was, by the way, excellent. And I paid $14.99 for it in cash because the algorithm has feelings about it. A pause. The app can be adjusted. The categories. The app can be deleted. Mom. Courtney, the 30-day clock is running. You know where to reach me. I hung up. Put the phone in my coat pocket. Went back to the roses.
The sky was doing something dramatic over the tree line. One of those gray November skies that looks like a painting of a sky rather than an actual one. John used to say Ohio had the best bad weather in the country because it committed to the bit. I've thought about that every November since he died, which is 4 Novembers now, and it still makes me smile a little. I tucked the last edge of burlap under the wire frame and stood up slowly, the way you stand up at 71 when you've been crouching for 20 minutes, carefully, with full awareness that your knees have opinions. Then I went inside and sent invoice number 002. Services rendered, emotional support consultation, telephone, October 14th to present, 18 sessions at standard rate. Subtotal, $3,600. Note, rate does not apply to calls initiated by client for the purpose of disputing invoice number 001, which are billed separately as adversarial proceedings. The next 10 days had a rhythm to them that I found genuinely enjoyable. Every morning I had coffee in the kitchen. I read Fine Gardening, which I was now receiving on the emergency visa, and which remained, in my assessment, worth every penny of $28 annually. I worked on my spreadsheets. I tended to the paperwork of the Hargrove Domestic Trust, which had grown to include a proper ledger, a fee schedule, and a one-page document I titled Terms and Conditions of Residential Access, version 1.0. Courtney left for work at 7:15 and came back around 6. She had stopped trying to discuss the invoices directly, which meant she was either ignoring them, consulting someone, or preparing something. Given that she's a lawyer, I assumed the third option and kept my documentation current. Brad, meanwhile, had become something between a house guest and a diplomatic envoy. He paid his kitchen access fee every Monday morning, $20, cash, placed under the corner of his coffee mug, no conversation required. He fixed the dripping faucet in the second bathroom without being asked. He started a spreadsheet of his own to track the shared grocery costs, which was either a coincidence or a sign that living with me was having an effect on his organizational habits. One evening, I came down at 11 to get a glass of water and found him at the kitchen table with a legal pad and 3 empty coffee cups. Working late? Property settlement draft. Our lawyers keep revising it, and somehow it keeps getting longer. What's the sticking point? He looked at me. The Telluride condo. She wants to sell. I want to keep it. We're at an impasse. What's it worth? About $480. Market's been good. Do you use it? We used to, before. He trailed off, looked at the legal pad. I haven't been there in 2 years. I sat down across from him. This was not something I had planned to do, but it was 11 o'clock and he had 3 empty coffee cups and the expression of a man who has been arguing about a condo he hasn't visited in 2 years and is starting to understand what that means. Brad. Why do you want to keep it? I don't know. It feels like giving it up is giving up something else. The marriage. Yeah. I got my water, sat back down. For what it's worth, from someone who has watched a lot of people make a lot of financial decisions under emotional pressure, the Telluride condo is not your marriage. Your marriage is whatever it was for however long it was. The condo is real estate. He looked at me for a long moment. Did you always give unsolicited financial advice, or is that a retirement thing? I gave solicited financial advice for 32 years. Retirement means I no longer have to wait to be asked. He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a real smile I'd seen from him in 3 months. Dot,
Can I ask you something? You can try. Are you actually going to, the invoices, the trust? What's the end game here? I considered the question. It deserved a real answer. The end game is that your wife understands that this house has an owner, and that owner is not the Family Budget Pro algorithm, and that there is a person in this kitchen who has 41 years and 14 cents invested in a specific apple pie, and that person is not a line item. Silence. She's not doing great, Dot. I want you to know that. Underneath all I know. She's scared of all of it. The divorce, being here, what comes next. I know that too. So why? Because scared people who aren't challenged become people who never stop being scared. And Courtney has been the smartest person in every room she's been in since she was 11 years old. And the only thing that's ever actually helped her is when someone pushed back. Brad looked at his legal pad.
Then at the coffee cups. She's going to be furious when the sheriff shows up. I looked at him. I haven't decided on the sheriff yet. But you've thought about it. A pause. I have a preliminary draft of the civil complaint. He put his head in his hands, not in distress, more like a man who has just confirmed a suspicion he'd been carrying for a week and doesn't quite know what to do with the confirmation. Jesus, Dot. Go to bed, Brad. You have a condo to sell. He gathered his legal pad, paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, Courtney got her thing for documentation from somewhere. He left. I sat in the kitchen for a while longer. The house was quiet the way houses are at 11 at night, that particular alive silence of a building that has been heated and lived in and is now resting. I opened my laptop and started on the civil complaint. Summit County Court of Common Pleas, Small Claims Division. Plaintiff, Dorothy Jean Hargrove. Defendant, Courtney Ann Hargrove Voss. Nature of claim, breach of domestic financial sovereignty, unauthorized exercise of account control, failure to remit payment on properly issued invoices. I drafted it carefully, not because I was certain I'd file it, but because in 32 years of auditing, I learned that the document you write for yourself, the one you draft at 11 o'clock when nobody's watching, is always the truest version of the one you'll eventually use. The coffee was still warm. Outside, something in the maple tree moved. A squirrel, probably, still doing whatever squirrels do in November, which from all evidence is mostly argue with each other. I kept writing. Courtney's response to invoice number 001 came on day 16. Not a check, not a phone call. A counter document, 3 pages, single-spaced, on her firm's letterhead, which I found both impressive and slightly missing the point, since she was technically generating billable hours to dispute a bill about billable hours. I kept this observation to myself. The document argued, in order, that the invoices were legally unenforceable, that the concept of a Hargrove domestic trust had no standing under Ohio law, that the billing methodology was creative but unsupported by precedent, and that the situation would benefit from a structured family conversation facilitated by a neutral third party, that is, a licensed therapist. It was a good document, solid, well-organized. It had a comma splice in the 3rd paragraph, which I circled in red and left on the kitchen table with a Post-it note that said, "Proofing consultation, $400, invoice to follow." I wasn't trying to be petty. I'm just thorough. The Richardson development happened the following week, which I only heard about secondhand through Brad, who told me at the kitchen table on a Wednesday while eating leftover chicken
and looking like a man who was not sure whether sharing this information made him a traitor or a survivor. Apparently, Courtney had mentioned the situation to Gerald Richardson, the senior partner at her firm. Not the full situation, not the trust, not the sheriff draft, but the general outline: mother, budget app, demand letter, escalating invoices. Richardson, according to Brad, had listened without expression for approximately 90 seconds and then said, "Courtney, your mother audited corporations for 32 years. She knows how paper trails work. Why would you start a paper trail with her?" Courtney had not, apparently, had a good answer to this. "She came home very quiet," Brad said. "How quiet?" "Ate dinner without revising anything. That quiet." I considered this. Gerald Richardson had graduated from Case Western in 1981. I knew this because I had looked him up, which is something I do with anyone relevant to an ongoing situation. He was a methodical man with a reputation for risk aversion, which is why his firm had survived 3 recessions without a major malpractice claim, and which is also why his assessment of Courtney's strategic position was probably accurate. Brad, did she tell him about the trust? The Sovereign Trust? The Hargrove Domestic Trust, number 1. A pause. I don't think so. She's been calling it a family disagreement. That's diplomatic. Dot, are you actually going to file with the court? I filed the draft. He put down his fork. You... Online portal, Summit County. It's in review. Dot, she's your daughter. She is, and she installed a spending limit on my apple pie, Brad. In my house. There has to be a number where the lesson lands. He picked up his fork again, ate in silence for a moment. Where is the number? I'll know it when I see her face. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they understand something they wished they didn't. The invoices kept coming. Invoice number 003. Laundry facility usage. 7 weeks at commercial rate. Invoice number 004. Pantry access. Estimated consumption, prorated from grocery receipts. Invoice number 005. A single phone call from Courtney on a Sunday afternoon in which she had said, among other things, that she was trying to do what's best for everyone, which I billed as a 45-minute advisory session with a notes surcharge. Each invoice went out by email, certified mail, and, just to be complete, a physical copy slipped under her bedroom door, which is, admittedly, the part that Ruth found funniest when I described it. You're sliding invoices under her door? In her own house? My house. In your own house. Ruth, please. Dot, I have been a cop for 30 years, and I have never in my life... Marge, she's sliding invoices under the door. I heard. Phyllis, are you hearing this? I've been hearing it, Ruth. I've been listening this whole time. Does it not delight you? It delights me a little. There! Even Phyllis. The week before Thanksgiving, Courtney made a unilateral decision that we would host the holiday. This was not discussed. I came downstairs one morning to find a color-coded meal planning chart on the refrigerator. Her handwriting, her color coding, a timeline from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. with tasks assigned by name. My name appeared 4 times. All 4 times said, Dot, apple pie ×2. See attached preferred recipe. There was an attached preferred recipe. It was not mine. It was from a website called cleaneatingfestive.com, and it contained almond flour, coconut sugar, and something called
cashew cream filling. I read it twice. Then I took it off the refrigerator. Then I got out my own recipe, which is handwritten on a card that is older than Courtney, and I put it in my recipe box, and I made my pies. Both of them. The way I have always made them, with butter and white sugar and apples that I buy at Kroger at Register 3 with a card that has not been declined since the day after the demand letter arrived when the restriction quietly and without acknowledgement disappeared. I did not mention the recipe. I did not mention the restriction being lifted. I put the pies in the oven and cleaned up the kitchen and set the table for 6 because I had invited Ruth and Marge and Phyllis, and when Courtney came downstairs and saw the table set for 6, she looked at me, and I looked at her, and nothing was said. The holiday was fine.
It was better than fine, actually. Ruth told a story about a Thanksgiving in 1998 involving a stolen turkey and a county evidence locker that made Brad laugh so hard he had to put down his wine. And Phyllis brought sweet potato rolls, and Marge brought a bottle of Riesling that was genuinely excellent, and which she claimed was from a case she'd been saving for a special occasion, without specifying what made this occasion special. After dinner, while Courtney and Brad were in the kitchen doing dishes, they had both, without discussion, started doing dishes after dinner, which was a change from the first 3 weeks. I sat with Ruth and Marge and Phyllis in the living room, and Ruth said quietly, the way Ruth says things when she's being serious, "Dot, when's the sheriff?" I looked at my wine. "Christmas." A pause. "You're going to have the sheriff come at Christmas?" "Christmas Eve. Dinner. I've invited her colleague from the firm, the one who told her she shouldn't have started a paper trail. I thought he should be there for the resolution." Another pause. Longer. "Dot, do you want to actually win this, or do you want to make a point?" "I want both." "Are you sure the point isn't going to cost you the win?" I thought about that. It was a fair question. Ruth has been asking fair questions for as long as I've known her, which is why she was good at her job and why I value her specifically. "She's not going to change," I said finally. "Not because I ask her to. Not because we have a structured family conversation with a licensed therapist. She changes because something in her architecture has to shift, and the thing that shifts it is the same thing that shifted every corporate auditor I ever sat across from. The moment they understood that the paperwork was real and there were real consequences attached to it." "She's not a corporation." "No, she's my daughter, which means the consequences can't be financial. They have to be social. She has to be embarrassed in front of someone she respects." Ruth and Marge exchanged a look. "Richardson is coming to Christmas dinner." "He accepted on Tuesday. He's bringing his wife." "Dot, that's diabolical." "That's auditing." Phyllis had been quiet through all of this. She was looking at her wine. When she finally spoke, it was in the voice she uses when she's decided something. "I want to be there." "You're invited. You're always invited." "I want to be there when the deputy comes. I want to see Courtney's face." Ruth looked at her. I looked at her. "Phyllis, I still think there's a better way to do this. I've thought that from the beginning. But if you're doing it, I want to be there." Phyllis Okafor. "Stop looking at me like that, Ruth." "I'm looking at you like you're my favorite person." "Well, stop." She ate the rest of her sweet potato roll, and she was there for Christmas. All 3 of them were. Christmas Eve. I had been cooking since 10 in the morning. Ham, scalloped potatoes, green beans with the little onions, dinner rolls from scratch, and 2 pies. Apple, both of them made with my recipe, with butter and white sugar, because that is what Christmas dinner is and has always been and will continue to be, regardless of what any algorithm thinks about it. The table was set for 10. Me, Courtney, Brad, Ruth, Marge, Phyllis, Gerald Richardson and his wife Carol, and my neighbor Pete Hoffman, who is 83 years old and has nowhere to go on holidays since his wife passed. So I've had him for Christmas for the last 6 years, and he never mentions it, and I never mention it, and we both consider this a reasonable arrangement. Old Pete had arrived first at 4 o'clock and was now in the living room watching a football game with the volume at a level comfortable for a man who has been resisting hearing aids since 2018. The Richardsons arrived at 5:30. Gerald Richardson was a tall man with the handshake of someone who has shaken hands professionally for 40 years. Firm, brief, calibrated. His wife Carol was warm and immediate, and had the look of a woman who understood exactly what kind of dinner she was attending and found it, privately, very entertaining. "Dorothy, your house is beautiful." "Thank you. Merry Christmas. Gerald, I'm glad you could come." Richardson looked around the living room, at Pete asleep in front of the football game, at Ruth and Marge at the kitchen table with wine, at the holiday decorations, which are the same decorations I have used for 30 years, including a slightly battered ceramic reindeer that John's mother made in a ceramics class in 1974, and which I will display until it disintegrates. "This is quite a gathering, Dorothy." "I like a full table at Christmas. Can I get you something to drink?" Courtney and Brad came downstairs at 6. Courtney had dressed carefully, the kind of careful that means she'd thought about it for longer than she'd admit. She saw Richardson in the living room, and her expression did a complicated thing that lasted approximately 1 second before she smoothed it out. "Gerald, Carol, I didn't know you'd be—" "Your mother invited us. Lovely house, Courtney." "Yes, yes." She looked at me across the room. I looked back. I was wearing my Christmas sweater, which is red and has a small embroidered cardinal on it, and which Courtney has been gently suggesting I replace for 5 years. I was wearing it on purpose. We sat down to dinner at 6:30. The doorbell rang at 7:14. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock, which is not something I do habitually, but which I was doing that evening because Deputy Hank Bouchard had told me, when I spoke with his office on Wednesday, that he would arrive between 7 and 7:30, and that he would need the door answered promptly as he had 3 more stops that evening and did not want to be late to his own Christmas dinner. Courtney was in the middle of a sentence, something about a case from earlier in the year, addressed to Richardson, the kind of professional conversation that is also an audition, when the doorbell rang. I put down my fork, stood up. "Excuse me a moment." I opened the front door. Deputy Bouchard was in uniform, which I had asked him to be, and he was holding a manila folder, which I had also asked him to have, and he had the expression of a man who is professional and thorough, and who has, in the last 48 hours, read the documents I submitted carefully enough to have questions. "Ms. Hargrove, evening." "Deputy, Merry Christmas. Come in." "I don't want to interrupt your—" "Please, we're just at dinner." I led him into the dining room. The table went quiet the way tables go quiet when a uniformed officer walks in, which is a silence with a very specific quality to it. Held breath, recalibration. Bouchard took in the table, the ham, the good dishes, Pete asleep in the next room, still audible through the television, the Richardsons, Ruth with her wineglass halfway to her mouth, Phyllis with her hands folded, Marge completely still, expression unreadable, and Courtney, who had gone the color of the dinner rolls. "Ms. Hargrove Voss? Courtney Hargrove Voss?" "Yes." "I'm Deputy Hank Bouchard, Summit County Sheriff's Office. I have a civil court notice for you, case number 24-SC-7741, Hargrove versus Hargrove Voss. Service of process, ma'am." He held out the folder. Courtney did not immediately take it. Bouchard opened the folder himself, looked at the top document, closed it again, and set it on the table in front of her. You'll want to review that at your convenience. Response deadline is noted on page 2. Courtney looked at the folder, looked at me, looked at Richardson. Richardson was looking at the folder with the careful expression of a man who had been told this might happen and who was now recalibrating from told about it to witnessing it. Dorothy, you actually filed. I filed the preliminary complaint in November. Service took a few weeks. You filed a civil court complaint against your daughter at Christmas dinner? The timing was Bouchard's. He had availability this evening. Bouchard, to his considerable credit, maintained a completely professional expression throughout this exchange. He had, I will note, read the entire complaint before arriving, because he had called my number on Thursday to clarify one item in the documentation, specifically whether the compound interest calculation was based on annual compounding or continuous, which I told him was annual, and which he had noted in the margin of his copy in a way that suggested he had run the numbers himself and found them accurate. Is there anything else I can help you with this evening, ma'am? No, Deputy. Thank you very much. Can I offer you a piece of pie for the road? He looked at the pie. He looked at the folder on the table. He looked at the assembled table of people looking at him. I appreciate it, ma'am, but I've got 2 more stops. You have a good Christmas. You as well. I walked him to the door. When I came back to the dining room, nobody had moved. Pete's football game was still audible from the living room. The ham was getting cold. Courtney had not opened the folder. Brad had his eyes on his plate with the focused attention of a man pretending to be somewhere else. Ruth was looking at the ceiling with an expression that meant she was working very hard not to say anything, which is the hardest work Ruth ever does. Phyllis had her hands still folded. Her face was doing something complicated. Not disapproval, something more like awe, maybe. The reluctant kind. Marge poured herself more wine. Richardson cleared his throat. Courtney, perhaps we should... Gerald, I need a moment. Of course. She picked up the folder, set it down, picked it up again. Mom? Yes? Did you actually file this? Yes. It goes to court. It goes to a scheduling conference first, then potentially to a hearing. The small claims limit in Ohio is $6,000, which means the case will involve representative damages rather than the full amount. But the documentation submitted is complete and the claim is properly filed. You're going to take me to small claims court. I'm prepared to. Whether I do depends on the next 30 days. What happens in the next 30 days? I sat back down, picked up my fork. The app comes off the card, permanently. You acknowledge, in writing, that apple pie is not a luxury item, and we have a conversation, not a structured family conversation with a licensed therapist, just a conversation in this kitchen about what the last 4 months have actually been about. All 3 of those things, and I withdraw the complaint. Silence. Richardson was looking at me with an expression I recognized. I had seen it across audit tables for 32 years. The look of a professional who has just watched someone execute a strategy more thoroughly than they expected and is recalibrating their assessment. Courtney. It was Carol Richardson who spoke. Her voice was kind. Sweetheart, I think you should take the deal. Courtney looked at her, at Richardson, at Brad, who was still looking at his plate. Brad looked up. Brad, what do I do? He was quiet for a moment. I think, and I want to be clear that I have been paying kitchen access fees for 6 weeks, and I have a complicated relationship with this situation. I think you should take the deal." "You've been paying kitchen access fees?" $20 a week. It's a reasonable rate. The coffee is good." Something happened in Courtney's face. Not quite a laugh, more like the thing that comes before a laugh when you're also about to cry and you're not sure which one is going to win. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, sat there for a moment. "Mom, I'll take the deal." The table let out a breath. Several people at once, which is a sound I didn't know a table full of people could make until that moment. Ruth refilled her wine. Marge cut herself more ham. Pete snored once, loudly, from the living room, and then was quiet again. "Good. Now eat your dinner. The potatoes are getting cold." Courtney looked at me. Something in her face, underneath the exhaustion and the embarrassment and the month and a half of this entire thing, was something else, something younger, something that looked like relief. "Mom?" "Courtney?" "The pie is really good." "I know. I'm sorry about the app." I looked at her. She looked back, not with a corporate lawyer face or a budget spreadsheet face, just Courtney, 44 years old, sitting at my Christmas table, the same table she'd sat at for every Christmas since she was born. "I know you are." We ate dinner. It was good. The rolls were good, the ham was excellent, the potatoes had held up better than I expected, and both pies disappeared entirely, which is the only real metric I apply to pies. Richardson paid me what I can only describe as a professional compliment on his way out. He shook my hand with the calibrated firmness and said very quietly, "Dorothy, I've been doing this for 38 years. Woke up from his nap, ate 2 pieces of pie, said, "Good ham, Dot," and walked home at 9:15. Marge left at 9:30, Ruth at 10, Phyllis last. She hugged me at the door for a long time without saying anything, and I let her, because Phyllis hugs are one of those things that are worth letting happen. At 10:30, it was just the 3 of us. Me, Courtney, Brad. The kitchen quiet and warm. Courtney was at the table with a cup of tea. She'd changed into pajamas, which I took as a sign of something, a lowering of some kind of guard. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "You can." "Did you always know how this was going to end?" I thought about that. Not exactly. I knew there was going to be a moment where something landed. I just needed to make sure the something was thorough enough to stick. $1.2 million is thorough. It was the accurate figure. I didn't inflate it. The mileage on the lacrosse. Standard IRS rate, year by year. I know. I checked. I looked at her. Of course you did. Mom. I was scared when I moved in. I know that doesn't make the app okay, but I was scared of everything being out of control. And you seemed like something I could manage, which I know is terrible. Yeah, terrible. I looked at my tea. Outside, it had started to snow. Actual snow, not the threatening but not committing kind, but real snow. The kind that means something in the morning. "You know what your father would have said?" I said. "What?" "He would have said, 'Courtney, your mother once audited a Fortune 500 company for 11 months and found 42 discrepancies and a hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands. You cannot out-organize your mother. Nobody can out-organize your mother.' And then he would have eaten 2 pieces of pie." Courtney looked at the window, at the snow. "I miss him." "I know." I I miss when things made sense. Things don't always make sense. You work with what you have. She was quiet for a moment. Brad came in from the living room, looked at both of us, assessed the situation with the accuracy of a man who has been living in this house for 3 months and has developed some skill at reading it. Everything okay in here? Yeah, Courtney said. Yeah, everything's okay. He sat down. The three of us sat in the kitchen for a while longer, not talking much, just in the way people sit in kitchens at the end of good dinners, warm and a little tired and not quite ready to move. The snow kept coming down outside the window. Eventually, I got up, washed my mug, and went to bed. In the morning, there was 3 inches on the ground, and Brad had shoveled the front walk without being asked, which is $20 by trust rate, but which I decided to let go. Some things you invoice, some things you let go. That's the whole job, really, knowing which is which. The complaint was withdrawn on January 3rd. I filed the paperwork myself, online, which took 11 minutes. Courtney wrote the acknowledgement, 2 sentences on plain paper, not firm letterhead. Apple pie is not a luxury item. It is a staple. She had signed it and left it on the kitchen table on New Year's morning with a cup of coffee she'd made for me before I came downstairs, which is something she used to do when she was in college and would come home for breaks, and which I hadn't seen in a long time. I kept the document. It's in the folder in the second drawer, right behind the timeline. Family Budget Pro was deleted from my account on December 26th. I know because I checked, and because a notification arrived on my phone that said, "Account Administrator Access has been removed," and I took a screenshot of it because 32 years of auditing means you document the resolution the same way you document the problem. The things that changed. Courtney knocks on the kitchen door frame now before she comes in, which she didn't used to do. Brad still pays his $20 on Monday mornings, which I've told him is no longer required, and which he continues to pay, which I've decided means something about him that I haven't fully categorized yet. The recliner is back where it belongs. The things that didn't change, Courtney still reorganizes things. She reorganized the linen closet in January and said nothing about it, and I also said nothing about it, because there is a difference between the things that matter and the things that are just Courtney, and the linen closet is just Courtney. The property settlement is still being argued about, though Brad told me last week that they've reached a preliminary agreement on the Telluride condo. He's selling his share to her, which he said felt right and which I did not comment on. They are still living here, temporarily. It's February now. The roses are under their burlap in the garden. The bird feeder has a new squirrel who is, if anything, more aggressive than the last one, and who I have named Gerald out of a sense of professional solidarity with Richardson, who called me in January to say that the Christmas dinner was the most memorable meal he'd attended in 30 years, and that if I was ever looking for a change in retirement, there was apparently a consulting firm that specialized in creative dispute resolution that would be lucky to have me. I told him I was retired. Then I made a pie. It's been a good winter. Tuesday nights, poker. Marge is on a run, which Ruth disputes loudly, and Phyllis tracks in a small notebook she started keeping sometime around October, which none of us have ever directly acknowledged. We play until 10 or 10:30, and then I put on decaf and we sit in the kitchen and talk, which is sometimes about gardening and sometimes about nothing in particular, and sometimes about whatever is happening in each of our lives that we need somewhere safe to put for a while. Last Tuesday, Phyllis said, out of nowhere, while looking at her cards, "Dot, do you think Courtney's going to be okay?" I looked at my hand. I had 2 pair, which was enough. "Yeah," I said, "she's going to be okay." "How do you know?" I put my cards down, looked around the table, Ruth squinting at her hand with the focused suspicion she applies to all things, Marge with her pen already out for the scoring, Phyllis watching me with her steady, careful eyes. "She ate the pie," I said. Ruth looked up. "Both pieces," I said. "Didn't leave a crumb." Ruth smiled, put her cards down. Full house. "Well," she said, "there you go." Outside, the February wind was doing something unreasonable to the maple tree. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee and sounded like four women who have known each other for 11 years and have, collectively, survived more than they expected and less than they feared. I looked at my two pair, decided to fold. Some hands you play, some you let go. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference. Invoice number 001, settled in full. Closing note. Client demonstrated adequate comprehension of service value. Account closed. No further action required. D. Hargrove, Senior Auditor, retired.